Hey, what's up? It's Jesko again from AcousticsInsider.com, where I teach home studio acoustic treatment techniques for audio professionals, but without all the voodoo. And it's time for another YouTube Questions Knowledge Bomb. This is the type of video where I answer your YouTube comments, questions, mainly because I don't find the time to get in there enough and I feel a bit guilty, but also to just give back a bit to the YouTube community. But before I get into that, if you are in the process of treating your home studio and you're wondering what the next step is for you to get your room to translate, I want you to download my home studio treatment framework at the link in the description. These are my 5 steps to treat a home studio and get it to translate. So this is a very top level perspective for you to understand what steps to take in which order in order to get to that ultimate goal of really getting a sound from your speakers that you can really trust. So it's all in there: how to set up your speakers, find your listening position, how to work with porous absorption, but also resonance absorption, when to bring in measurements and how to kind of work with those if you're treating a home studio, subwoofers, speaker decoupling. It's all in there, nicely laid out for you to follow along so that you know what the next step is in your treatment process. So again, if you are in the process of treating your home studio, make sure you download my home studio treatment framework at the link in the description. And with that, let's jump into the first question. This one is by Halcyon Guitars on a video called Attic Studio, Do Sloped Ceilings Reduce Standing Waves? And they ask, this is topically tangential, but how much weight do you put on the Bonello Criteria? So the Bonello Criteria is a way to judge the quality of room dimensions, of room ratios. Yeah, so you kind of plug in the major dimensions of your room into a room mode calculator, and it will spit out where you lie on the Bonello Criteria scale, if you will. And it tells you something about the distribution of room modes and whether you've got an even distribution of room modes, really. So how much weight do I put on this? Well, not that much, to be honest. There are a couple of reasons. The first one is this whole idea of calculating room modes really only works out or kind of translates into the real world if you are in a room with pretty much fully reflective walls. So think concrete bunker. Yeah, in that case, the calculation will very accurately match what is actually happening in the room. But in a home studio, often we're dealing with not perfectly reflective walls. So for example, if they are just made from drywall, that will actually let some base energy kind of go through the walls. And that means that not only will a particular standing wave that would normally reflect off of that wall not be created that strong, but it can also shift the frequency of that particular room mode. And then obviously we also have rooms that are asymmetrical, and in that case this whole idea kind of just goes out the window in the first place, yeah, because this really only works for square rooms, yeah, so think shoebox shaped rooms. The other part is that this is only one step in one of many steps in getting a room with a good low end. So for example, the next thing in this chain of steps, no matter how good the dimensions of your room are, is actually placing your listening position correctly, because you will still get standing waves and you still need to place your listening position in a spot where they balance out against each other in a way that actually gives you an even low end. And that works no matter what room you're in and what the distribution of room modes is. Yeah, it will work only as good as the room mode pattern will allow, but you still need to do this no matter what room you're in. And then obviously beyond that, we're talking treatment, we're talking potentially equalization at the end of the process. There are many steps that determine the low end balance that you eventually end up with at your listening position. And getting the room dimensions right is just one step at the very beginning of that process. It's also not particularly reliable. Again, think home studio, asymmetric rooms made out of different types of wall materials. So how much weight do I put on this? If I'm looking at treating a square room, I will go through calculating the room mode pattern, and I will look at the Bonello Criteria. And also, obviously, if we're building a new room, if we get to choose the dimensions, we also will look at the Bonello Criteria and make sure that we get as much out of that as possible. But I don't linger on it too much, because it is just that one small step, and there are a lot of other steps that follow that also need to be done correctly in order to get the low end right. So if that one first step isn't perfect, that doesn't mean that all the other steps won't work. Yeah? So how much weight do I put on it? Not that much. It's interesting enough as a kind of exercise, but it's definitely not something that you should spend most of your time on. Okay, next question is by @303 on the same video. So Attic Studio, do sloped ceilings reduce standing waves? And he asks, do the effects of room modes impact listening at all positions? I think no. If not, do room modes that impact places other than the listening positions matter? And if they don't matter, is there a way to treat wall surfaces so that room mode issues are reduced at the listening position? Example, acoustic absorption to the direct right and left, above, below, front, and back. All right, so a bunch of questions in here. First of all, do the effects of room modes impact listening at all positions? Absolutely. So the way you have to think about this is, picture, let's say you take your room and you fill it halfway with water. And then you actually agitate that water, so that creates waves sloshing about in the room, okay? And then at some point you just freeze wherever that wave pattern is. And so that's kind of what the room mode pattern in a room will look like. It'll kind of be like a frozen version of water sloshing about. And that means, and each of those waves transverses the entire room. So where you are in the room impacts what balance of energy you hear from all those different room modes. And how these room modes impact other places doesn't directly matter for where you are in the listening position, but of course it's those same room modes that also affect all the other positions, except that you're probably in a different part of the cycle of the wave, and so you'll get a different amount of energy from any particular room mode, and obviously in combination of all the room modes you'll get a different low end balance. Now, is there a way to treat wall surfaces so that room mode issues are reduced at the listening position? Yes, absolutely. Again, what you ask, is it acoustic absorption on the direct left, right, above, below, and front, back? Yeah, that's exactly the way to do it. Again, because those waves transverse the entire room, and so you don't need to place your treatment in the exact spot, obviously, where you're listening, and that doesn't really work. Instead, you place your treatment in a different part of that same wave, ideally right on the wall. Okay, so if we're talking, for example, a standing wave between the left and right wall, that's one wave. And if we manage to treat and damp that wave on one end, that entire wave will be damped. And so the effect will also get reduced at the listening position. I hope that makes sense. Good question. This next one is by The Off H on a video called DIY Home Studio Treatment Bass Control in a Tiny Attic Studio. And they ask, hi Jesko, quick silly question. What is a good method to determine whether speaker monitor is already distorting or can be pushed a little more? I do not trust my ear's perception on certain matters. This is one of them. Yeah, good question. I mean, obviously you could measure distortion with speaker distortion with software, acoustic measurement software. Room EQ Wizard does do that, but that's not entirely trivial. If it properly distorts, you will hear it. Yeah, for example, if you are using SonarWorks or some other EQ package, and it pushes a lot of energy into the speaker at a certain frequency, that usually means that the limit of how much power the amplifier can give at that frequency is reached much quicker. And so you'll hear when the speaker distorts if you turn it up, if you turn the volume up, because there's less headroom available. And so either the inbuilt limiter will kick in, or the speaker will literally just start distorting, and you will very much hear that. How can you find out if it's being pushed a little more? Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, obviously this distortion thing isn't a on or off thing. It gradually increases the more you push the speaker to its limit. And so by ear, if the distortion is very small, you probably can't even hear it. And that means you could potentially push it more until the point where you can hear it, although you probably wouldn't want to do that. But that's slightly tricky to answer. I would say definitely pay attention to the inbuilt limiter. Yeah, so if the speaker starts limiting the volume, that means you've definitely reached the threshold of where it starts distorting, or it's distorting too much. And then obviously pay attention to what you're hearing. Distortion tends to be, or like severe distortion tends to be very obvious, so you should be able to hear that. Good question. This next one is by @StrangeWorldPainted on a video called Diffusion. Can you measure it in a home studio? Hi there, are polystyrene diffusers okay? I have 3 wooden ones, but I have a surface that I can't grip because of the weight. So I have to admit, I don't have any experience with polystyrene diffusers. I haven't used them simply because actually I have. It's been a while, but I have. But we did it, I definitely mentioned at the beginning when we treated that studio that I think this is more for aesthetic purposes. The thing here with diffusion is that you need the sound waves to fully reflect off of the diffusing surface, at the very least in the frequency range that you're trying to diffuse. And that means the surface needs to be very hard. If you pay attention to somebody like Thomas Jean from Northwood Acoustics, he will definitely say it needs to be heavy wood, period. Then again, some of the kind of the creators of diffusion are part of the company RPG Acoustics, and they sell polystyrene diffusers and say that they work perfectly fine. I'm skeptical. If I do intend to install diffusion, and then do intend it to work, I will definitely use heavy wood for the construction. And I'm pretty sure that there are cheaper kind of plastic diffusers out there that probably don't work all that well. I'm sure it also depends on how they're constructed exactly. But just keep in mind that for diffusion to work properly, you do need that surface to be fully reflective. And so that's kind of the question you ask yourself. You need to ask yourself, if you're looking at a product like this, is the material properly reflective at the frequencies that the diffuser is supposed to work at? Not entirely, I can't really, it's difficult to give you an absolute answer here, but that's kind of the way to think about it. Cool, good question. So this next one is by I Love Telecasters. On the same video, Diffusion, can you measure it in a home studio? Hey, appreciate all of your content. Thank you. I'm currently treating my space with Rockwool and have made a big, deep panel between my speakers, which means the speakers aren't in visible sight of each other. It has helped a lot with imaging, but it might have done more bad than good. It's like the bass has been reduced to the point where the speakers, Yamaha HS7s, are very bright and harsh. Is there a general rule for placing thick absorption between the speakers, or do you have any idea of what the problem could be? First of all, in general, I'm not sure why you'd want to place absorption between your speakers. Obviously, you could, if you put very deep absorption between your speakers, that would help with potentially with room modes, standing waves in the front to back axis. I can only hazard a guess here as well, but my gut tells me that you're actually controlling the bass better with that absorption in the room. And so you are now seeing what the response is without a kind of fake push of low-end energy that you're getting from the untreated room. That might be one version. It might also be that, again, you are controlling a certain room mode, so that's good. But now another acoustic effect has popped up, potentially speaker boundary interference, that is actually removing energy from your low end, which was kind of counteracted before from the room mode. That's also a potential cause, maybe. You always have to remember that there are a lot of effects interacting that in the untreated room that then create the overall balance, low end balance that you're getting. And so if you just remove one of those, it might be that another one now pops up and shows its ugly face. And so it's very, very hard to kind of definitively say this is what's going on without knowing exactly how you ended up setting your speakers up the way that you did, how you ended up choosing your listening position, how much treatment is actually in the room. But that's why I created the home studio treatment framework and the process that goes along with that. Yeah? Because if you do things in the right order, you can mitigate and avoid these sorts of problems happening. Yeah? Because you can then rely on each of those potential issues to be solved kind of at the right moment in the process. And then all these steps kind of build on each other while knowing that one won't negatively interfere with the previous one, if that makes sense. Yeah. So maybe that's something you should do. Have a look at the home studio treatment framework at the link, and then make sure you've covered those steps in that order. And that hopefully should remove the problem that you're seeing. But good question. Interesting problem. So this next one is by @JWReturn on the same video. Diffusion, can you measure it in a home studio? And he says, great channel, Jesko, thanks for all this info. Do you or anyone else have an opinion on when you cross the threshold of small room to non-small room, or a home studio to a size where diffusion can have a significant economic impact? I may be building a room in the future, and if adding another 4 feet to length will make a significant difference, it may be worth it, right? Again, difficult to answer because there is no real kind of concrete definition of what a small room is. Yeah, although you could say that you reach big rooms once the dimensions are so big that standing waves only build up below the audible threshold. So think concert halls, theaters, that sort of thing. Which tells me, or which should tell you, that just adding another 4 feet of length to the room won't move you from a small room to a big room. Yeah, you probably have to triple, quadruple the size of your room entirely in order to do that. But going into the question of when diffusion becomes economical, significant and economic, I'm not sure that you can ever talk about diffusion being economic, because diffusion is always going to be very expensive and very narrow in the effective frequency range in comparison to just absorption. And so if does it ever become economic? I'm not sure. It'll always be a significant increase in cost that you're adding to the construction of the studio. So from that perspective, I would say there is no size where it becomes economic. Can it become significant? Absolutely. And especially the first thing obviously here is the room big enough for it to make sense to use diffusion in the first place? Yeah. So at this point, we're talking about rooms that are big enough so that you don't need all the space, or you don't need as much space as possible for absorption, because you don't have enough space for absorption in the first place. Yeah. So it needs to be bigger than that so that you have the luxury of actually using diffusion. And then it becomes a question of character of the sound as well, right? So because diffuse reflections still give you a sense of space, but that broken up pattern just gives you kind of a different quality to the reverberant field. And that mainly is, in my opinion, is a taste question. Yeah. So can they have a significant impact? Sure, if you put enough of them in the room. And for a home studio, do you need it? At what size? Well, again, a big room. Yeah, a big room where it's not really you're not really talking about a home studio anymore. Yeah, we're really talking about big live rooms, for example, or again, some sort of performance space, perhaps. Yeah, and at that point, you can get enough diffusion in there for it to be have a significant impact, and also be worth it, because you can. Well, first of all, you have the budget, but also because you can tailor the ambience in the room. You can change that to an extent that you like, basically, right? Tricky question, not the most satisfying answer, I'm sure, but good question nonetheless. This next one is by @bflippystrans. Sorry, @bflipsytrans. There we go. On a video called Bass Traps, I've got this annoying resonance at 126 hertz. And they say, I have a room very similar to the example room in this video, but where the front wall is mostly glass, dual layered glass. I have multiple sets of curtains stacked in the corners and usually have one set of curtains covering the glass wall. Should I consider the properties of the glass in a similar way as the walls? What would the best advice be for this situation? Yeah, with dual layered, double pane or triple pane glass, it actually responds similar to walls, to drywalls. So I would say basically treat as in not acoustically treat, but approach the treatment, approach the how you deal with this window in the same way that you would a wall. If there is a problem with a window, it's usually very obvious and you will be able to hear it. And so at that point, you really need to think about whether it makes sense to kind of change the orientation of your setup, for example, face a different wall or something. But unless it is causing an obvious issue, I would simply treat the window just like any other wall, or approach the treatment of the window just like any other wall. Obviously, the question that is that has nothing to do with acoustics and is usually the more important question is whether you are willing to sacrifice the light coming through the window, whether you're willing to sacrifice the view potentially. Yeah, those questions, funnily enough, are usually the ones that then answer that you need to answer in order to figure out what to do with the window. Yeah, but in terms of acoustics with dual layered, triple layered glass, it performs similar enough to standard walls that I would approach the window just like any other wall. Good question. And the final one here is by @cadmiummusic on the last knowledge bomb, actually. Could you please put all the knowledge bombs videos in a playlist for us? Then we could listen to them one after the other. I find them really useful at the moment as I treat my new studio. Amazing. I'm glad you find them so useful. They are actually in a playlist already. Let me just double check. It is called, let me just switch over here. So this is the playlist that I've got. So it's called the YouTube Comments Q&A. Cool, that's it for this video, for this knowledge bomb. I hope that answered a few of your questions. As always, let's get back to learning to trust our ears. Have fun making music in the studio. I'll see you in the next video.